This is the future of Africa. In this program, we focus on Horn of Africa's political, economic, and socio-cultural aspects. Let's share our vision, hopes, and professional critics. All views are esteemed. Stay with us. Dr. Ban, welcome to this program.
Thank you for having me again, Dr. Hussein.
Great. Dr. Ban Asoba is a lifetime serving participant of the Oromo people struggle for self-determination. He has a rich experience and lifetime experience, actually. Today we'll be discussing on the peace agreement signed between the TPLF and the Ethiopian government. As you know, after a long time war, the TPLF and the Ethiopian government has reached on a peace agreement. And Dr. Ban, how do you see this peace agreement in general terms? We all support, advocate anything that solves through political solution instead of military solution. But in general terms, how do you see this peace agreement after so long destruction?
Thank you, Dr. Hussein. Well, to begin with, when two warring parties, two sides who have been engaged in war to solve quote-unquote political problems for the last 2 years, and the war that caused a lot of sufferings and human toll and economic destruction and several damages to society, to infrastructure, and to human life, agree to sit down in the presence of third parties and negotiate peace is something that should be welcome. In the history of Ethiopia, even though I cannot say that this is a watershed moment, I can say that it is kind of a turning point. That for the first time, the Ethiopian political forces, particularly the government, agreeing to sit down with opponents and negotiate peaceful resolution of political problems. This is happening for the first time. In this regard, it is a turning point. However, now before we go to the terms of the agreements, such agreements have some fundamental prerequisites. The parties, in order to resolve the underlying problems, must and is required to engage in the negotiation with full political will and good faith to resolve the underlying problems. In this regard, I doubt that the Ethiopian government has engaged in good faith in this, one. The other side is that the Ethiopian political problems and lack of peace and war for political reasons is not only between the Ethiopian government and the TPLF. There are several wars in the country. A solution, peaceful solution of political problems for the country requires an all-inclusive negotiation in the presence of third parties. This is lacking. I see this peace agreement as kind of half, not complete, not all-inclusive. In this regard, really, I don't think it will resolve the political problems in the country. I don't believe that it will usher peace, development, and respect of human rights in Ethiopia.
Thank you, Dr. Ban. Let's go to some of the critical aspects of this agreement. There are a number of articles in it. It has objectives, actually, and it has a number of articles, including its implementation. My interest is on issues that are related to constitution, like the constitutional issue. They have agreed to return to the constitution and act accordingly, according to 1995 constitution. Now, I see something contradictory. The PP government is a government that stands for unitary, most probably advocating the imperial time. And the constitution is more of a constitution that resembles to the federal camp. So these things are categorically or paradoxically opposite. How do you see this?
Very good. Exactly. I agree with you, Dr. Hussein, that one of the fundamental points of this agreement is the issue relevant to the constitution. The parties agreed that to restore constitutional order, uphold the 1995 constitution and resolve all issues consistent with that constitution. This is in another way admitting that in the last 4 years, this constitution has been violated, the federal system has been violated, and the regime's major preoccupation was to undermine this constitution and undermine the federal system, even though it was not democratic, but there was a federal system in place, but the regime was undermining it. Rather, the forces that allied with the regime and also publicly claimed that they provide the regime with a roadmap on the way forward are known to be anti this constitution and anti the federalist system. In a way, in this agreement, the regime has agreed that we'll go back to status quo ante, to the restoration of the constitution. That's a great agreement which should be supported. Furthermore, agreeing to restore the constitutional order is also agreeing to go back regarding the Tigray region and the territorial issues of the Tigray region, to restore to the status quo that was pre the war in 2020. Yep. So territorial disputes that between Tigray and the Amhara region, that means was resolved or agreed to be resolved based on the Tigray people's demands that the Western Tigray or Southern Tigray territories that were usurped or changed because of the war will be restored to Tigray. That is a fundamental issue. For the other people in Ethiopia, agreeing to restore constitutional order means now, whether it will be practiced is something else, but at least the regime conceded that there was violation of the constitution, there was an intent to violate the constitution, and now they agreed to restore that constitutional order. I see that as a great beginning, Dr. Hussein.
That's great. That's great reflection. Basically, I believe that the reason for that government to immerse itself into war was just the problem of not adhering to the constitution of that nation. And there was a tendency of rejecting the question of nations and nationalities, the question of Oromo people, and they then immerse themselves into war. And after all this destruction, look at the political failure, look at the issue of security, look at the issue of economy, inflation, corruption, drought, famine, what have you, and the diplomatic relation of that nation. Now, to just unfold what is happening, it might require 20, 30 years. That's a light estimate. And why do you think that returning to that constitution is the focus for both sides? And do you think that this agreement is going to be challenged because of this, because Eritreans are there, the issue of the boundary is there in terms of Tigray and the Amhara region? The conflict is basically there in a sense. And in reality, it's like, okay, after wasting this all, they unfold to the important point whereby we all would like to promote, and we have been promoting it in real terms. That constitution includes Article 39, basically, the right to self-determination. That's what we have been fighting for. And now the government and TPLF is back to that. How do you see this?
That's very good. You know, it begs a question that if now they come to agree, if the government now came to agree to restore the constitutional order and resolve political differences consistent with the constitution, you wonder, why did they opt for war then? Why did they go to war and cause all this massive destruction of human life and property? Why? So it is another way, a tacit agreement that really they should not have gone to war. They should have resolved those constitutional issues, political issues, peacefully. Now they agreed that all political differences must be resolved consistent with the constitution and peacefully. Well, Dr. Hussein, you raised a very good question. If there is a goodwill, one, to honor the constitution, respect the constitution, and uphold the rule of law, if really the government negotiated in good faith to uphold the constitution, resolve political differences only through political means and through dialogue and peacefully, then war could be averted and the current crisis will be resolved. So the issue now hinges on whether really the negotiation was done in good faith. Look, the Tigray people were self-administering autonomous part of Ethiopia. There was decisions that will be made to postpone the election to create condition for the PP's unilateral participation in the election. And there was no really good reason to postpone that election. And they made up some sham proceedings, and they used the COVID pandemic, which was not really that much serious at that time in Ethiopia, to postpone the election. The Tigray leader said, we don't have to postpone the election, we'll go to the election. And they conducted a very, by many accepted as free, fair, and credible election. Now, who did not provide that? The regime did not allow to honor the constitution and to conduct election in time as provided by the constitution. Now, the regime conducted an election uncontested, uncompetitive. All the competitive parties were locked up in prison. For example, in Oromia, PP alone competed against itself and won 100%. Prime Minister chaired the meeting in which he was elected. He nominated himself. So who in fact really violated the constitution in this regard if the election was also, the Tigray election was unconstitutional? Rather, the Ethiopian election was more unconstitutional. Now, the Tigray government established subsequent to that election was, by this agreement, deemed unconstitutional, and they have agreed to do another election. Actually, that is really kind of a miscarriage of justice, in my opinion. If they made the Tigray election null and void, likewise, the election that conducted Ethiopia must be made null and void, and all do it again to make a new beginning. I see that a problem. So the problem is still unresolved. How? I doubt the regime's objective is to uphold that constitution, because the last 4 years don't show that. Further, the regime's supporters who provided the regime the roadmap of his regime, how to go forward, are fundamentally anti that 1995 constitution. They are fundamentally anti-federation. They are imperial type unitarists. Well, as long as these differences cannot be resolved through negotiation peacefully among all the stakeholders in the country, if they believe all are stakeholders, then the situation is not resolved. Agreeing with Tigray alone does not resolve the political crisis in Ethiopia. So if they really are serious, if the regime particularly is serious to resolve the political problems of the Ethiopian empire state, they have to sit down in negotiation of all-inclusive negotiation of all stakeholders, which will map forward how to go forward regarding about the country, about the state, about the constitution, about coexistence, about shared rule and self-rule issues. Unless all these issues are not resolved, really we are just postponing the underlying problems and contradictions of Ethiopia. And then it will not lead us to peace and prosperity, of course.
Thank you, Dr. Ban. We'll come back to that point. Now, let's dive into the other aspect of the agreement, which is very important next to the Constitution, as far as I'm concerned. That is the DDR, disarm, demobilize, and reintegrate. And that part, particularly disarming, is a critical one. It's obvious that a nation can't have two defense power. That's a kind of legitimate question. But at this stage, disarming, demobilizing, and reintegrating the TPLF force, is this something that could be actually happened, or there is something uncovered over there? Because it seems that it was a kind of more than unexpected kind of agreement, more than expected actually. So how do you see that part?
That's good, exactly. Well, one of the weakest side of this agreement is how the DDR was agreed to, in my opinion. The DDR was given more priorities than helping the people of Tigray, having access to humanitarian needs, and than giving access to other humanitarian institutions. DDR was given priority. DDR was even given a timetable of 30 days. Of course, there was a provision in the agreement that says subject to conditions on the ground. They will be disarmed, demobilized within 30 days, and surrender heavy weapons. Is this practical? For many reasons, I doubt. One, this very quick disarmament, the DDR agreement that was signed, does not guarantee the safety and security of the Tigray people. To begin with, there was some a big unacknowledged, directly unacknowledged factor in the DDR issue. There is an involvement of Eritrea in this war. Eritrea is involved as an ally to the regime and in fighting the Tigray people and the TDF. And that war is still continuing without even directly stating that Tigray out of Eritrea must withdraw out of Tigray and Tigray security will be guaranteed. Was not stated in that. And all this leads me to say that the DDR probably might not be implemented. On the other side, in Tigray today, it's not really only TPLF that is fighting. It's just after the war was started in 2020, the Tigray people organized and established TDF, Tigray Defense Forces. Tigray Defense Forces, whether Tigray Defense Forces and TPLF are identical is a known factor. Second, the DDR is subject to be implemented without guaranteeing the safety and security of the Tigray people, particularly from aggression of Eritrea. And Eritreans are also still in Tigray. Their withdrawal was not pronounced, and the Ethiopian regime did not take responsibility in this agreement to direct agreement to force Eritreans out of the Tigray and Ethiopian territory. Of course, there was an indirect statement in this agreement that says the federal government will secure territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ethiopia. But that is not enough, in my opinion. The elephant in the house, Eritrea must have been called by name. There should be an agreement that the Eritrean forces, and given a deadline, just like Tigray should be disarmed within 30 days, Eritrea withdrawal must precede that. There is no something like that. So will the DDR be implemented as agreed upon? Dr. Hussein, I doubt it very much. Again, my doubt is more strengthened by the fact that the war is still continuing. Eritrea is still involved in fighting. Even the Ethiopian government too agreed to cessation of hostilities, even permanent cessation of hostilities, did not stop the war. They are waging war in Ethiopia and did not even stop the war in Tigray yet. So given all this, taking all this together, I very much doubt that the DDR at least will be implemented as written and within the deadline given by the agreement.
Thank you so much. We have been advocating this. I think it's a good start, given its intention and its actual implication is, I mean, if that's going to be positive, I think we need to promote a kind of peace agreement in this way. But there is the other element people tend to focus on, the issue of accountability. Some people critique that peace agreement, that it's kind of agreement which overlooked the issue of accountability, given what is happening in that nation in terms of human rights violation, what have you, all the crises that did happen in that country. How do you see that element, the issue of accountability?
That is a very important issue, Dr. Hussein. Accountability is, there was a finding prior to this agreement by the United Nations Human Rights Council that in Tigray, war crime has been committed, crimes against humanity has been committed, sexual violences, war as a means of war was committed, and even people were, famine was used as a weapon of war. People were starved to death. Civilians were targeted in actions of the Ethiopian government where there were no even military operations or presence of any Tigray fighter. So there is a ground that there was crime committed in Tigray. War crimes, crimes against humanity, and crime of sexual violence, and civilians were attacked. All these findings were there. Now, if there are some findings, what that should be followed by more investigation and hold perpetrators of this crime accountable. In this agreement, the government itself was given the responsibility of holding those who perpetrated, who committed these heinous crimes accountable. Imagine, can that happen? If the government is questioned as an actor that committed that crime, will it hold itself accountable? I think that is mockery of justice, I think. Further, the issue of accountability is not really appropriately addressed, in my opinion, in this agreement. Furthermore, even the guarantors of the agreement matters a lot. Prior to this agreement, really, countries, institutions that were very vocal about what has been done to the Tigray people and about the crimes that have been committed were the United States, the European Union, and the United Nations. And deliberately, these institutions, the UN, the United States, and the European Union were not stated in this agreement as could be guarantors. The guarantors were made Olusegun Obasanjo, OU, and IGAD, and there's a catchphrase that African problems solved by African means or something like that. But I think this doesn't hold water. This African Union and other institutions, they never even acknowledged that war crime has been committed in Tigray. They never acknowledged crimes against humanity have been committed. They never even speak up about it. They did not. So having them to be guarantors is really kind of a joke. Furthermore, do they have the leverage that is required to influence actors, particularly the Ethiopian government, to abide by the agreement it signed with the TPLF? What if the Ethiopian government fails to abide by the agreement it publicly, in the presence of third parties, entered into? Would Obasanjo and OU be able to compel the parties, particularly the Ethiopian government? Do they have the leverage to do so? I doubt they have that. I think the Ethiopian government deliberately, I think, forced out the European Union, the United States role, and the United Nations role out of this agreement. Because these institutions have leverage on the Ethiopian government.
Thanks so much, Dr. Ban.
They are donors. They are donors. When they stop the donation, the financial donation, the other thing is that will compel the conduct of the Ethiopian government. But that was not provided for in this agreement. So as an accountability issue, the guarantee issue is kind of not sufficient, Dr. Hussein, to say the least.
Thanks so much, Dr. Ban. Let's assume that, let's take this in a good intention. Let's assume that the intention is very positive and its implementation is going to happen. I personally wish that the same will extend to the other regions of Ethiopia, particularly Oromia. With this in mind, how do you define the implication of this agreement to that of what is happening in Oromia? And we'll be discussing in detail about Oromia separately, but does it have some kind of implication? If it is positive, there's no problem. For instance, if the intention is just for DDR, that doesn't work. If not, if it is for lasting peace, I think the same will happen or should happen to the Oromia region and other nations and the nationalities in terms of creating peace, because solving the problem of TPLF, between TPLF and the Ethiopian government, can't move an inch to bring about peace in their country alone. I mean, there should be a kind of all-inclusive dialogue, and peace should be for all. For instance, what's happening in Oromia is really disturbing these days. Before diving into the Oromia context, let's focus on its implication.
Great. Well, our analysis, our assumptions about this agreement, about the intention of the parties, particularly the intention of the government, we are based on pragmatism. We are based on the past record of the region. Do I want to be wrong in my assumption? Of course. I want this thing to be, as you said, have a positive implication. But positive implication is provided that the regime really is serious. The regime has the political will to resolve all political questions in the country peacefully and consistent with the 1995 Constitution. If really the regime has that intent, this will be a very good precedent. Precedent means that what is good for the northern Ethiopia should also be good for the Oromo and for the greater southern Ethiopia, right? If of course the history of Ethiopia doesn't show that. The history of Ethiopia has this northern and southern dichotomy. The northerns were more equals, and the southerns, including the Oromo, are less equals. That's what Ethiopia. Let's admit that. And Abiy likes that Ethiopia. You remember, Abiy was saying that the Orthodox Church is the country. That's a double talk. We know what it means. It's imperial Ethiopia's ambition. If they gave up that and all people in the country are equal and all political differences, political questions must be resolved peacefully and through dialogue and by reaching willingly and voluntarily an agreement. This is a very good precedent what was started with Tigray. Let us wait and see. If this is implemented, it's a really, that's why I said in the beginning, it's kind of a turning point. But it will be a turning point if it's implemented. By the way, I must add also that those who observed this agreement, Mr. Obasanjo, said that this is a first step. If Ethiopian government also believes that this is a first step, they have to perfect the loopholes of the agreement and make more agreements, not only with Tigray and with the Oromo also. Well, it is up to the Oromos now to question if the region is willing to solve disputes, political disputes with TPLF in such a manner through peaceful negotiation and agreement. Why not that region applies the same policy and position with the Oromo Liberation Army? Oromo must ask ourselves this question. If the region follows the old Ethiopian, imperial Ethiopian mindset, they will not do that with the Oromo. The reason is that it is the conquered people. They want to keep it as such. Who is to defy that? It is up to us, up to the Oromos, to fight for equal treatment, to fight for equal status and equality, and force the regime to come to terms, just like it did with the Northerners, with the Oromos, and with larger Southern also.
Thanks so much, and we wish all the best, and we promote peace instead of war. And in fact, I had a chance to talk to one of the high-level politicians, and I really get his comment is like he's fearing the repetition of the Oromia agreement. I think Oromia, yes, and it said that agreement was like X and Y agreed and support Menelik to subjugate the Oromo people, and
yes.
he was referring to that. So it has to be genuine, I think. It has to be genuine, and there should not be any kind of deception. Everything should be clear, and what has happened in the northern part of Ethiopia should be happened in the other part of the country, including in Oromia. With this in mind, you can add on that. Let's go to the context of Oromia today. Look at what's happening in Oromia. In fact, we tend to forget that the war itself started in Oromia, in Guji, Borana, and Walaga. Then all over shift to Tigray region, and after all this damage, and amid this, there was a kind of aggravation in Oromia, whereby other supporters were also invited to Oromia, and we did comment on that it's like firing on adding fuel on a burning fire to try that kind of thing in Oromia. And now what's happening in Oromia is very, very disturbing. Forget about the war between those who are armed, the killing of innocent people using even drones. How do you say this?
Exactly. I think particularly if the I hope the Western world people will, governments will listen to our discussion. It should be admitted that the regime now in power first declared war on the Oromo people. The war against Tigray was declared in November 2020. A year prior to that, in 2019, the regime unleashed war and terror on Oromia, all over Oromia, all over. The war was declared on not only on the armed groups, it was on the people. It is to be remembered that they trained thousands of what they called militia or special militia of Oromia, and they dispatched them to all districts of Oromia, and they were killing everywhere. They were killing elders, kids, the religious leaders, and youth all over. And that was to terrorize the Oromo people and to force them to submit to the fiat of the regime. And not only that, the war with the Oromo Liberation Army is continuing. Today we are hearing that that war is very progressing, and they even today controlled the regional capital of Western Oromia, Nakamte. And the war is continuing in the south, in the east, everywhere. The Western world must acknowledge that the war raging in Ethiopia is not only in the northern Ethiopia. Rather, it was started previously against the southern, against the Oromo, against the Walaita, against the Sidama, and it is ongoing. One, this must be acknowledged. If they wish to help Ethiopia to be a peaceful country, one of the major problems is the Oromo question. They should help also to resolve the Oromo question. Any deal, any agreement that doesn't include the Oromo question and the other southern people's questions cannot be complete. One, it cannot bring peace in Ethiopia. So the Western world must pay attention to that. If they are really sincerely and also fairly would like to bring peace to Ethiopia, and would help also other parties negotiate peace with the regime. So far, the Ethiopian government, the present and the predecessors, never had a good will to resolve political questions through peaceful means. Now, it was indicated in the agreement, the Pretoria Agreement, that political differences, political questions will be resolved peacefully. If Abiy Ahmed meant that and accepted this agreement in good faith, he has to stop war against the Oromo and start engaging in peaceful negotiation with Oromo Liberation Army and with all Oromo people. Otherwise, Dr. Hussein, I fully agree with you that while still continuing to bombard the Oromo people, the Oromo children, by the way, the school kids were bombarded. Civilians were bombarded by drones and fighter jets. In Oromia, it is going on. Farmers are being bombarded. Civilians are targeted for the only reason that to terrorize the people. Terror is modus operandi of tyrannical regimes of Ethiopia. Well, the Western world must take this note. Most importantly, the Oromos should fight for their rights and equal treatment. It can't be two laws. It can't be two constitutions in one country. The constitutions that apply to resolve the Tigray question, which we agree, must also be applied to the Oromo question and other people in the south.
Thanks so much. And we'll be coming to that point at the end of our discussion, what is expected of the Oromo people. Now, as a senior politician, let me challenge you. Usually, I like fallacy, and there are fallacies in that country. For instance, over the past 4 years, Oromos have never been killed in such a manner, never been imprisoned, never been pushed out of the boundary. But there are claims that, in spite of all this, the current government is an Oromo government. There are two wings or a group of people advocating this. One is the non-Oromos, who tends to push that government to distract everything of the Oromos, and the other wing is some of the Oromo group themselves. And it's like the claim is during the 16th, 17th, the struggle was against the imperial and the feudal kind of government. And during 17th and the 18th, it was like the TPLF, if you like. And now there is a tendency of, okay, this is the Oromo government, and why we fight against the Oromo government is a kind of question. For me, what determines is the practice. And if you like, the imperial Haile Selassie I was partly an Oromo guy, and Mengistu Haile Mariam was the same. And now currently there are few people on power and driving the prosperity party in the name of the Oromo people, but everything is against the Oromo people. The questions raised during 2018 by the use of the Oromos and the Oromo people, they all drop, and the fashion is like dancing with those who advocate the past. One nation, one culture, one language, and perhaps advocating the past, the imperial time and beyond. How do you see this? Do you agree? Is it the Oromo government who is taking, who is doing everything over there?
Question. To begin with, I disagree with those who think that, or who hold the opinion that the incumbent regime of Ethiopia, led by Colonel Abiy Ahmed, is an Oromo government, an Oromo regime. So what defines a government, that an Oromo government, a democratic government, or other things? I think what is the yardstick? We have to ask ourselves that what defines a government, a regime, in my opinion, is it is policies. The policies the government promotes and protects, and its actions. I will come back to this. But regarding participation of Oromos in the Ethiopian Empire State and serving the Ethiopian Empire State, the current ones are not the first. What defines the Ethiopian state is it is policies. It is objectives. Not really who is a tool, an instrument of that objective. Since the conquest, Oromos have served at highest positions in the Ethiopian Empire State, particularly in the military. Oromos had highest positions. Starting from the War of Conquest, history should be remembered that Gobana Dache was the commander of the conquering army of Minilik. And then after that, even now, they start talking about even Emperor Haile Selassie had an Oromo blood. His father is half Oromo, half Shoan Amara. And even Mengistu Haile Mariam, after he lost power, admitted he is half Oromo, half Amara. But during their dominance, they never admitted that to begin with. It doesn't matter. What this shows us that if XYZ is an Oromo or speaks of an Oromo, did not make and doesn't make the Ethiopian Empire State an Oromo state. No, it is the policy that defines the state. If we measure it in democratic terms, we define them as a tyrannical dictatorship and other things. But in the values they promote, in the policies they promote, I think Ethiopian regimes are defined. Look, since 1974, Dr. Hussein, there was a de-imperialization reforms in Ethiopia. The land to the tiller, that the dirt implemented, declared implemented was an attempt to reform the imperial Ethiopia, because the land tenure in Ethiopia was divided between the conquered and the conquerors, the north and the south. The southerners were peasants, tenants, and serfs. So the conquered lost everything. So the conquerors took the land. The land belonged to the conqueror. So the land tells the divide between north and south. They are different. That shows an equal relationship between the conquerors and the conquered. That was an attempt to reform. Particularly the 1991 and 95 Constitution was an attempt to reform the empire, to build federal union among the northerners and the southerners, and based on shared rule and self-rule principle. That attempt was reversed by the current regime. The current regime is now promoting the roadmap given to the regime by the unitarists. That means those who want to build Ethiopia, and they call it Ethiopian ideology, which it means one nation that speaks Amharic, that promote Amhara culture, and if possible also follow Orthodox religious beliefs. That's what Ethiopia means. So what defines a regime is its actions and its objectives. These imperial objectives are not the objectives of the Oromo struggle. Oromo are struggling for self-determination, for peaceful and democratic union, for unity based on equality, and shared principles, shared values, completely opposite to the imperial vision and wish of Ethiopian northern elites, particularly the Amhara elites. The current regime and their roadmap is following that reversal of even the attempted reforms toward unitary nation-building agenda of Emperor Haile Selassie. Abiy aspires to be an emperor like Haile Selassie. So one cannot, in a rightful mind, call this regime is an Ethiopian regime. It is not any different than previous regimes if it comes up to the Oromo issue. Furthermore, the actions define a regime. As I have stated previously in this discussion, the regime led by Abiy Ahmed has declared war on the Oromo people prior to the war declared on the Tigray people. He has publicly, in a meeting about that, he will break the Oromo so that it will not rise up in 1,000 years. How come this is an Oromo interest? How come this is an Oromo-led regime? By the way, if Ethiopia is led by the Oromo, it will be an Ethiopia based on equality for all and justice for all. That is the values of Oromos.
Thank you.
The current regime doesn't follow that, my brother.
Thank you so much. I think we need to refer to the policies, strategies, actions, practices, and what's actually happening, not about individual or individuals who took possession. Oromos never struggled for that. And with this, let me take you to the other fallacy, which is again interesting. Despite the ongoing war, the damage in that country in terms of politics, in terms of economy, in terms of diplomacy, and so on, the government of Ethiopia tends to claim growth, development, prosperity. I couldn't understand the magic over there. In fact, I did ask an economist, and he explained to me what's meant by that. Just to get your reflection, this is a fallacy for me. It's impossible to think about economic growth, economic development, go beyond that, prosperity, human development, human capital, and so on. So for me, prosperity is like the highest level of it. leave alone prosperity, the issue of economic growth, economic development, human capital, and human development is unthinkable amid war. How do you see this? For me, it is fallacy. Do you agree or disagree? With this, we'll go to the final conclusion of our discussion.
I agree. I agree with you, Dr. Hussein. I just want to say one thing and move to this point. In 1973 or 72, in Ethiopian University, in Addis Ababa University, Oromo students issued a pamphlet titled Oromo Voice Against Tyranny. That document exactly defines what Oromos wish and the objectives of the Oromos. One sentence says, Oromos have no empire to build. Oromos wish not empire building. So the empire building agenda is not an Oromo agenda. The Oromo agenda is building relationship based on equality. Having said that, I agree with you. The talk about prosperity in Ethiopia, while at the same time disregarding democracy and human rights, while at the same time engaging in gross violations of human rights, while at the same time using drones and jets bombarding civilians, at the same time when political issues are not resolved. Talking about prosperity is really indeed a fallacy. It's a contradiction. It means it is not true. I think in the Gospel of Prosperity Party, prosperity means, I'm sorry, it is self-enrichment of the elites. I think that's how I perceive it. This regime is highly corrupt, highly. And corruption is rampant. Just like inflation, corruption is rampant in Ethiopia. These corrupt officials, I think they are engaged in self-enrichment, using the state power to enrich themselves. I think if they call that prosperity, quote unquote, that they are prospering. But the nation, the country is not prospering. People can ask, did the livelihood of an ordinary citizen of the country change it for the better or worse in the last 4 years?
Yep.
The value of the money tells that. The inflation tells that. The government's treasury itself tells that the change is to the worst. People cannot meet ends. Their incomes cannot cover their expenses for basic needs. So where is prosperity? I think in the mind of the current folks, leaders of Ethiopia, prosperity means decorating parks, I think. And decorating, for that matter, only in the capital city. And building parks, building some buildings. But that does not change at all the livelihood of the broad masses, the people of the country. As you said, Dr. Hussein, I agree with you. The talk about prosperity is fallacy. Furthermore, when the country's earnings, budget, the largest portion goes to war, how can that be prosperity? War is a wastage of prosperity, wastage of property and human life, with no return for that matter. It's an investment in nothing, isn't it? So a country that has engaged in war and every day talks about war and mobilize people to war and even go to mobilizing people to engage in a very savage war, how can it be prosper? How can it get prosperity? No. First of all, prosperity requires, everybody should know that or knows, I think, peace and the rule of law. Where there is no rule of law and peace, where there is no unaccountable government, I don't think prosperity could be achieved. And the talk is, Dr. Hussein, you're absolutely right, is a fallacy and a deception. I agree with you.
Thank you so much. Personally, I have hope that the question of the Oromo people is not capable for that matter, and unless we address that, it's very difficult to continue as a nation for that matter. And but I see some challenges from the Oromo side, the problem of unity. I always advocate this. Oromos should unite, and perhaps organized, and we elites should educate continuously. Our people should be educated. I'm not saying the people are not aware of everything going on, but we need to unite, organize, and perhaps we need to educate more our people. With this, I will give you kind of final remark opportunity within a split of second, particularly in relation to what is expected of the Oromo people.
Well, did you refer to the policy of the Ethiopian regimes of denying the Oromo question, right?
Yes.
Yes. Well, this has been the policy of successive Ethiopian regimes, because they planned, the conquerors, particularly since Emperor Haile Selassie, they planned to assimilate and incorporate Oromo into the Amhara culture. To some extent, they succeeded. There were attempts of intermarriage. There were attempts of the education itself was geared towards Ethiopianization, so to say. We have personal examples. During Imperial Ethiopian time, when you go to school, the school is purposely planned to Amharanize. The value of Amhara is taught. The value of others were undermined and insulted and shamed. So by doing that, they planned to incorporate Oromo into the Amhara-hood. Then that did not succeed. The education did not turn as they wished the educated Oromos to call themselves Amharas. Rather,
they used to change the names of individuals. If you have Oromo
changing names, exactly, yeah. Changing names, forcibly changing religions. That was the plan. And when national consciousness came, Oromos start going back to their roots. So you are absolutely right. The denial of existence of the Oromo itself was a policy. Leave alone the struggle. Even the nation's existence was deliberately denied. During Derg time, I remember that when they start to establish some self-rule autonomous areas, they deliberately avoided even the existence of the Oromo community as possibly self-ruling, self-administering entity, because they followed the same policy of Haile Selassie of assimilation and incorporating Oromo into Amhara, the nation-building agenda. The purpose was, if they succeed to incorporate Oromo fully or partially into the Ethiopian nation, that means they are building the Ethiopian nation, and the smaller ones, the frontiers are marginal. But now, they still follow the same policy. Even Abiy Ahmed follows the same policy. He doesn't even sometimes believe that there is an Oromo nation. He goes somewhere, say, hey, you guys speak the Guji language. He goes to try to go to Bali and you speak Bali language. To divide the Oromo. To divide the Oromo and weaken the Oromo is the objective of the Ethiopian empire. They don't even realize that that objective has terribly failed. So that's the question. They have to come to their terms now. Moving forward, they have to admit a huge Oromo nation, which is almost more close to half the population of 110 million Ethiopian population are Oromos. And this huge nation wants to rule itself. We want to be masters of ourselves. We want to rule ourselves and coexist with others if others so will, based on equality and mutual interests.
Thanks so much, Dr. Ban. Given what we have gone through and what's happening now, what's expected of the Oromos? That was a kind of final remark I'm expecting from you,
exactly.
because
Oromo,
we are running out of time.
What is expected of the Oromo, Dr. Hussein, is
yes.
Continue the struggle until you become your own masters, until Oromo nation exercises its God-given natural right to self-determination. Oromos must continue their struggle. Never be deceived by the propaganda of the Ethiopian regime. Continue the struggle. We're on the right track. Support all your liberation struggle, and we will achieve it. After that, as I stated in my discussion previously, we are not struggling to build an empire. We are struggling to establish our own self-rule state of Oromo. And we are struggling to establish coexistence, political relationship with other people in the empire state of Ethiopia based on equality and mutual interest. Until this is achieved, Oromo is not free, and there won't be peace and prosperity in that empire, in that country.
Thanks so much, Dr. Ban. With this, we conclude our discussion today with Dr. Ban Asoba. For those of you who have vision, professional critic, and hopes, you can come and share. The door is open. And my name is Hussein Kader, and you can contact me through my Facebook. See you next time. Profoundly thank you, Dr. Ban.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
This is the future of Africa. In this program, we focus on Horn of Africa's political, economic, and socio-cultural aspects. Let's share our vision, hopes, and professional critics. All views are esteemed. Stay with us.